skies over the South China Sea have become a hotspot for more frequent and tense encounters between US and Chinese military planes. In a dramatic display of military might, Chinese fighter jets scrambled to intercept a US Navy patrol, igniting a high-stakes confrontation that left onlookers breathless. What transpired during this airborne standoff? How did the US respond to this bold act of aggression? And what implications does it hold for international relations? Join us as we unravel the thrilling details of this unprecedented military encounter. As tensions simmer in one of the world's most contested regions, a recent encounter in the South China Sea has captured global attention. Every incident carries the risk of starting a dangerous conflict in this already sensitive area. One of the most alarming events happened in February 2023, when a Chinese J-11 fighter jet flew dangerously close, within just 20 feet, of a U.S. Air Force RC-135 spy plane. The U.S. aircraft had no choice but to fly through the turbulence of the Chinese jet, a risky move. U.S. officials called this action overly aggressive and extremely dangerous. This was not a one-time event. Just 2 months earlier, in December 2022, another J-11 jet came within 20 feet of the front of another U.S. RC-135, forcing the U.S. plane to quickly change direction to avoid a crash. These close calls show how easily a mistake could lead to a serious confrontation. But it's not just American planes that have been involved in such events. In June 2022, an Australian P-8 naval surveillance plane was blocked by a Chinese J-16 fighter jet. The Chinese plane dropped chaff, small bits of aluminum used to confuse radar systems. Some of this chaff was sucked into the Australian plane's engine, putting the entire crew in danger. These encounters aren't limited to the skies either. In October 2018, a Chinese destroyer came within just 45 yards of the USS Decatur, a U.S. guided missile destroyer, during a freedom of navigation mission near the Spratly Islands. The dangerously close distance of these warships highlights the fine line between peace and conflict in the region. From 2016 to 2023, over 180 incidents involving unsafe or unprofessional actions by Chinese planes and ships near U.S. military assets have been reported in the Indo-Pacific region. Each encounter tends to follow a similar pattern. U.S. or allied forces carry out what they see as routine patrols in international airspace or waters, while China sees these actions as provoking moves near its claimed areas. China's interceptions are viewed by the U.S. as dangerously aggressive, while China defends them as necessary protective steps. The South China Sea is more than just a vast body of water. It's the heart of a growing power struggle between two global giants, the United States and China. Covering about 1.4 million square miles, this region is critical for the world's economy, as nearly a third of all global shipping passes through these waters. China claims almost 90% of the South China Sea, a claim that not only angers its neighboring countries but is also strongly opposed by the international community. On the other hand, the U.S. isn't interested in claiming any of this territory for itself. Instead, it's focused on keeping the sea open for everyone, viewing these waters as international and vital to global trade and security. China's bold move to build and militarize artificial islands in the region has raised alarms around the world. To counter this, the U.S. has stepped up its military presence, regularly patrolling the area to ensure freedom of navigation and challenge China's growing influence. Both nations are building up their military forces, and every encounter in these disputed waters carries the danger of a mistake that could lead to a much bigger conflict. These high-tension encounters often involve intercepts, where one aircraft approaches another, either to identify it or send a message. Some of these encounters are routine, but others are much more aggressive, with the intent to intimidate or assert territorial control. In military aviation, there are rules about what makes an intercept safe or unsafe. A safe intercept means the aircraft keeps a safe distance, usually at least 500 feet, and avoids sudden or threatening moves. The pilot should also make contact either by radio or visually to make sure their intentions are clear. However, things have gotten more dangerous in the South China Sea, with unsafe intercepts becoming more common. These risky maneuvers can include flying dangerously close, making sudden movements, or using electronic warfare to mess with the other aircraft's systems. Such actions don't just break international norms, but also greatly increase the risk of an accident or misjudgment, which could quickly escalate into a larger conflict. The legal rules about airspace in the South China Sea are complicated and hotly debated. According to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, countries can claim an exclusive economic zone, EEEZ, up to 200 nautical miles from their coastlines, where they have rights to resources but cannot restrict others' freedom to navigate or fly overhead. However, China's claims go far beyond this limit, extending thousands of miles from its coast and overlapping with the EEZs of other nations. The US, although not officially part of UNCLOS, generally follows its principles and insists that its aircraft are flying in international airspace, with the right to carry out surveillance missions without interference. This disagreement over the interpretation of international law is at the core of many tense encounters between US and Chinese aircraft. Both sides believe their actions are legal and necessary, creating a delicate situation where even a small misunderstanding could quickly spiral into something much bigger. The US Navy is constantly prepared to respond tactically if needed, as the stakes in the South China Sea couldn't be higher. When a US Navy patrol aircraft is suddenly approached by a Chinese fighter jet, a series of well-practiced steps immediately come into play. The crew's main goal is to keep the situation safe while still completing their mission. This calls for quick thinking and exact movements to avoid any missteps. The first thing the US crew does is try to establish communication with the approaching fighter jet. They use international emergency radio frequencies, usually 121.5 MHz or 243.166 MHz, to explain their intentions and ask the Chinese jet to keep a safe distance. This effort to communicate is crucial because it can help calm the situation and prevent any misunderstandings. If talking doesn't work or if the fighter jet continues flying too close in a threatening way, the US plane may need to make careful moves to stay safe. This could mean adjusting altitude, speed, or direction to create more space between the two planes. These maneuvers are done very carefully, aiming to avoid looking aggressive while still protecting the US aircraft. Throughout the entire event, the crew remains in constant contact with their command center, providing real-time updates on what's happening. This includes sharing information about the behavior of the Chinese jet, the success or failure of communication attempts, and the status of their plane. If the situation becomes more serious, additional US military forces nearby may be put on standby. These could include fighter jets from nearby bases or aircraft carriers, ready to offer support if things get out of hand. Their presence alone can often be enough to prevent further aggression. Despite these stressful encounters, the US patrol plane usually continues its mission. These missions are vital for collecting intelligence on China's military activities in the area. This includes monitoring the development of new weapons, tracking naval and air movements, and keeping an eye on the construction of artificial islands. The data gathered helps the US better understand China's military capabilities and intentions, shaping US military strategies, diplomatic actions, and policies in the South China Sea. To handle these tense encounters, US Navy crews undergo rigorous training. Through regular drills and simulations, they learn how to respond quickly and effectively to a range of potential intercept situations. The training focuses on staying calm under pressure, following strict protocols, and avoiding any actions that might accidentally make things worse. The outcome of these high-stakes encounters can vary widely. Sometimes the two aircraft simply maintain a safe distance, with the Chinese jet observing for a while before flying off. However, in the worst-case scenario, the situation could escalate, and a mid-air collision, a highly dangerous possibility, could occur. While such encounters are often tense, the focus remains on keeping them as uneventful as possible. In the year 2001, a worrying event happened near Haiyan Island when a Chinese fighter jet crashed into a US Navy plane. Sadly, the crash resulted in the death of the Chinese pilot and caused a tense standoff that lasted for 10 to 11 days. Even though there was no physical fight, these types of incidents can easily lead to serious diplomatic arguments. Both countries quickly filed official complaints and accusations against each other, further straining their already fragile relationship. The situation could have gotten much worse if the US aircraft had been damaged or forced to land. Such a scenario might have started a dangerous chain reaction of military responses, possibly leading to a larger conflict. The effects of these incidents extend beyond just the US and China. If such an interception were to happen near friendly nations like Japan or the Philippines, it could trigger mutual defense agreements, pulling other countries into the conflict and greatly expanding the situation. The stakes have never been higher. The frequency and nature of these encounters have deep effects on military strategy in the Indo-Pacific region. For the United States, these incidents highlight the urgent need for a strong and steady military presence in the area. This presence is crucial to counter China's growing assertiveness and to reassure regional allies of US support. As a result, there has been a thorough reevaluation of the US military's approach in this region, with a greater focus on developing and using advanced reconnaissance and surveillance capabilities. These improvements aim to operate from longer distances, thereby reducing the risk of close encounters. On the other hand, for China, these interceptions serve several strategic purposes. They firmly assert China's territorial claims, clearly showing Beijing's readiness to challenge what it sees as US intrusions into its area of influence. Additionally, these actions allow China to gather important information about US military capabilities and operational patterns, information that is invaluable for Chinese military planners. Moreover, these encounters give China a chance to test the determination of the US and its allies by pushing the limits of acceptable behavior. By doing so, China can see how far it can go before provoking a serious response. This gradual strategy of assertiveness, often referred to as salami slicing, allows China to change the status quo in its favor without starting an outright conflict. However, an overly aggressive response from the US could raise tensions and force regional countries to choose sides, a situation that many would prefer to avoid. Looking ahead, the dynamics of US-China military interactions in the South China Sea are expected to change significantly. These changes will be influenced by advancements in technology, shifting global realities, and changing strategic priorities. One major trend is the growing reliance on unmanned systems. Both the US and China are investing heavily in autonomous and remotely piloted aircraft as well as naval vessels. These technologies could change the nature of military encounters, potentially reducing risks to human lives while introducing new challenges in decision-making and communication. Moreover, artificial intelligence and machine learning are likely to play an increasingly important role in military operations. These technologies have the potential to improve situational awareness, speed up decision-making, and enable more advanced electronic warfare capabilities. As both nations adapt to these changes, the future of military interactions in the region will undoubtedly become more complex and unpredictable. However, this situation raises important questions about the risks of misunderstanding or unintended escalation if AI systems fail to grasp complex situations. The ongoing development of hypersonic weapons and advanced missile systems could also change the strategic balance in the region. These advanced weapons might be capable of overwhelming current defense systems, making certain naval and air operations much riskier. Moreover, climate change is another critical factor that could reshape future dynamics in the South China Sea. Rising sea levels could impact the status of disputed islands and reefs, potentially altering territorial claims. Additionally, an increase in the frequency and intensity of storms could disrupt military operations in the area. There is a growing awareness of the need for clearer communication methods and strategies to de-escalate tensions, preventing incidents from spiraling out of control. Efforts are underway to establish hotlines and agree on conduct codes for unexpected encounters at sea and in the air. However, progress has been slow, largely due to differing interpretations of international law and varying strategic interests. The role of international law in managing these conflicts is essential, but often debated. While the United States pushes for a rules-based international order, China tends to interpret these rules differently, resulting in ongoing disagreements over the legality of military activities in the South China Sea. Future developments in international maritime law and its interpretation could significantly influence how these disputes are handled. As both the US and China continue to enhance their military capabilities and refine their strategies, the risk of miscalculation remains a serious concern. Striking a balance between being assertive and showing restraint, as well as navigating competition and cooperation, will be key challenges for both nations in the years ahead. The stakes in the South China Sea are exceptionally high, not just for the US and China, but for the entire region and the global order. How these two powers manage their rivalry in this vital waterway will have far-reaching effects on international security, trade, and the rule of law for decades to come. The incident between a Chinese fighter jet and a US Navy P-8 Poseidon reconnaissance aircraft in August 2023 is an important event that shows the rising tensions in the South China Sea, especially near the Paracel Islands. This area is important because of its strategic location and overlapping territorial claims, making it a hotspot for military activities. During the encounter, the Chinese jet, part of the People's Liberation Army Air Force (PELAAF), performed a dangerous maneuver by flying within 500 feet of the US aircraft. This close distance is concerning because, at the high speeds these jets travel, even a small mistake could result in a mid-air collision with terrible consequences. The P-8 Poseidon was on a routine surveillance mission, meant to watch the maritime activities in the region. Such missions are essential for gathering information and ensuring freedom of navigation in international waters, something that the US and its allies consider vital for keeping regional stability. However, China's claim over almost the entire South China Sea, despite international rulings against it, creates conflict with other nations operating in the area. The aggressive actions of the Chinese pilot can be seen as part of a larger strategy to scare and deter US military operations, reinforcing China's claims over these contested waters. This incident highlights the risks associated with such close encounters. Military aircraft from rival nations flying in such proximity can create a tricky situation where even the smallest mistake or miscommunication could escalate into a much larger conflict. Additionally, the encounter shows the challenges faced by the US in balancing the need to uphold international law while avoiding provoking a hostile response from China, which is a rising military power with growing influence in the region. The US Navy's response during the incident with the Chinese fighter jet was a careful display of restraint and professionalism. The crew of the P-8 Poseidon, well trained for such situations, quickly recognized the potential threat as the Chinese jet approached at a concerning distance. Understanding the seriousness of the situation, the crew tried to communicate with the Chinese pilot. This standard procedure was aimed at reducing tensions and preventing any misunderstandings that could lead to an international crisis. The message from the US Navy crew was clear. They intended to continue their lawful mission in international airspace and requested that the Chinese jet keep a safe distance to avoid any risk of collision. This communication was crucial, showing the US Navy's commitment to following international law and conducting its operations transparently and responsibly. Despite not receiving a response from the Chinese pilot, the US Navy aircraft maintained its course. This decision aligned with the broader strategic goals of the US military, especially in contested areas like the South China Sea. By holding their position, the crew reinforced the principle of freedom of navigation, which is a key part of US policy in the Indo-Pacific region. This stance is vital for countering China's increasingly assertive territorial claims and ensuring that international waters and airspace remain open to all nations. Moreover, the P-8 Poseidon crew understood that any sign of retreat or hesitation could be seen as a weakness, possibly encouraging further aggressive actions from China. Their choice to proceed with the mission, even with the Chinese jet so close, was a deliberate show of determination. It signaled to China and the international community that the US would not be easily deterred from its operations. This approach reflects the US Navy's broader strategy in the region, which seeks to balance assertiveness with caution to avoid unnecessary escalation while still protecting national interests. The encounter between the Chinese fighter jet and the US Navy aircraft symbolizes a larger, long-term strategic rivalry in the South China Sea. This region is a focal point of tension, not only due to its rich natural resources, like oil, gas, and fisheries, but also because of its strategic importance as a major maritime route. Approximately one-third of global shipping passes through these waters, accounting for about $3.4 trillion in trade annually. Control over the South China Sea is, therefore, crucial for both economic and military influence in the Asia-Pacific region. China's bold military actions, which often involve close encounters with US and allied aircraft, are part of a clear plan to increase its power in the region. Through these risky operations, China seeks to challenge the presence of foreign military forces, especially those from the United States, while strengthening its broad territorial claims. This happens despite international rulings, like the 2016 decision from the Permanent Court of Arbitration, which denied China's large claims under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS. In response, China has been busy building and militarizing man-made islands, turning them into strong military bases. These sites, equipped with runways, missile systems, and advanced radar, act as unsinkable aircraft carriers, allowing China to extend its military reach across the region. Historically, the South China Sea has been a disputed area, but in recent years, China has shown a growing willingness to use its military strength to change the current balance of power. In reaction, the US and its allies have conducted freedom of navigation operations, FONOPs, to challenge China's extreme maritime claims and ensure these key waters stay open for global trade and navigation. However, these operations often lead to tense standoffs, as China tries to scare off these missions by showing off its military power, such as following and harassing US and allied planes and ships. This situation has serious effects on regional security and global stability. The South China Sea is a hotspot where the interests of several major powers overlap, and any mistake or unexpected escalation during these close encounters could potentially lead to a larger conflict. The global community is increasingly worried about the risk of an arms race in the region. Countries like Vietnam and the Philippines, which also claim parts of the South China Sea, might feel the need to build up their military strength in response to China's aggressive actions. The ongoing military buildup in the area and the frequency of these encounters highlight the fragile balance of power and emphasize the importance of diplomatic efforts to manage tensions and avoid conflict. The military and diplomatic fallout from incidents involving Chinese fighter jets and US Navy aircraft is both significant and complicated. These close encounters in such an important area as the South China Sea increase the risk of accidental conflict. The situation is highly unstable, where even a small mistake could lead to a larger fight involving not just the immediate parties, but also their allies. The US Indo-Pacific Command has noted a worrying rise in these incidents since 2021, showing a trend toward more frequent and aggressive Chinese military actions. This change in tactics seems aimed at challenging US military control in the region and testing the resolve of US forces. These incidents are not isolated events. They are part of a bigger pattern of military positioning by China, aimed at asserting its territorial claims and expanding its influence in the Indo-Pacific. The proximity of military aircraft during these encounters increases the risk of accidents, which could lead to larger military clashes. For example, a collision between planes could trigger a series of retaliatory actions, quickly escalating into a wider conflict, especially given the large number of military assets in the region. On the diplomatic side, these military tensions directly impact US-China relations. Each incident adds to the existing strain, making diplomatic negotiations more difficult. The US views its operations in the South China Sea as crucial for upholding international law and supporting allies like the Philippines and Vietnam, who are also involved in territorial disputes with China. For these countries, US presence is vital in countering China's growing influence, which they see as a direct threat to their sovereignty. On the other hand, China sees US operations as provocative and a challenge to its territorial claims. The Chinese government has repeatedly criticized these freedom of navigation operations, FONOPs, as destabilizing, using such incidents to justify its military buildup in the region. This creates a cycle where military actions lead to diplomatic responses, which then justify more military moves. These ongoing tensions complicate broader efforts to manage the already strained US-China relationship, which is facing challenges over issues such as trade, human rights, and Taiwan. The South China Sea, being a key crossroads for global trade and military strategy, becomes a flashpoint that could threaten not just regional stability but also global security. The long-term strategic effects of these repeated close encounters in the South China Sea are worrying for global security. This region, because of its strategic location and rich natural resources, serves as a crucial point in the international security framework. China's growing militarization, along with the continued presence of U.S. military forces, sets the stage for potential conflicts with far-reaching global impacts. The frequency and intensity of these incidents reflect a larger geopolitical struggle between the U.S. and China, both competing for power in the Indo-Pacific region. These encounters highlight the dangers involved in great power competition, especially in a multipolar world where mistakes can lead to unintended escalations. As both nations continue to build up their military strength in the region, the chances of a small incident turning into a larger conflict increase. This situation is further complicated by the firm positions of both countries regarding sovereignty and territorial claims. China remains committed to its broad claims over the South China Sea, while the U.S. is determined to uphold international law and freedom of navigation. The strategic challenge for the U.S. and its allies lies in stopping Chinese aggression without starting a military conflict. This delicate balance requires a mix of military readiness and diplomatic engagement. Military preparedness is essential to show strength, but it must be paired with ongoing diplomatic efforts to keep communication open and prevent incidents from escalating. The U.S. and its allies need to strengthen their strategic dialogue with China, focusing on setting clear rules of engagement in the South China Sea to minimize misunderstandings that could lead to conflict. Additionally, these incidents show the importance of regional security frameworks and alliances. The U.S. must continue to work closely with its allies, including Japan, Australia, and ASEAN nations, to create a collective security structure capable of managing and reducing the risks posed by China's growing military presence. This includes improving intelligence sharing, conducting joint military exercises, and coordinating diplomatic efforts to present a united front. What are your thoughts on the Chinese fighter jets intercepting a U.S. Navy patrol in the South China Sea? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section.